You're lying in bed, phone dead, lights off, nothing to do, no music, no podcasts, no endless scroll of curated content, just silence. You stare at the ceiling. 10 minutes pass, then 20, then 30. You feel it. Not pain, not hunger. Something worse, a gnawing emptiness. You twitch, your leg shakes involuntarily. You reach for your phone even though you know it's dead, almost reflexively. And suddenly, you're face to face with a feeling modern life has tried to bury under a million digital distractions. You are bored. Now pause. Why does that word, boredom, feel so insignificant, even childish? Why does it carry the weight of a minor inconvenience rather than a psychological event? And yet, why does it scare you so much when it lingers? Not a dramatic fear, not like a shadow in the hallway or a loud knock at midnight. No, this is subtler, more existential. It's the kind of fear that whispers instead of screams. It doesn't shout for attention. It leaves you alone long enough to hear your own mind. That's the thing, isn't it? In silence, in stillness, when everything external stops moving, something internal wakes up. Something ancient, something untamed, something you've been avoiding for years. And so the paradox begins. Boredom is one of the most avoided states of being in modern life, and yet, it might be the most necessary. We flee from it like it's a threat. We crush it under instant gratification, multitasking, sensory overload. We've built an entire civilization designed to eliminate boredom. Instant communication, infinite entertainment, notifications pinging like heartbeats. The idea of being without stimulation is seen almost as a failure. You're bored, that's your fault. You're not interesting enough. Do something, be someone, move. But what if all of that is a lie? What if boredom isn't a flaw in the system, but a signal? What if boredom is not a sign of emptiness, but the doorway to depth? You see, society has conditioned you to think boredom is a void, a lack, a waiting room between important experiences. But what if it's actually a mirror, one that shows you who you really are when nothing else is there to distract you? That's what makes boredom so terrifying, because in those moments of total stillness, you begin to feel the weight of your unlived life. You feel the pressure of thoughts you've buried, the echoes of paths not taken, the questions you've been too busy to ask. And that silence, that unbearable silence, that's you knocking on the door of your own attention. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Centuries later, not much has changed. Perhaps it's even worse. We've created more ways to escape ourselves than ever before, and we call it progress. But let's ask a different kind of question. What if boredom isn't the problem, but the cure? What if your discomfort is a compass pointing you towards something deeper? What if the very feeling you're taught to eliminate is actually the beginning of real thought? Think about it. Would Carl Jung have uncovered the shadow without solitude? Would Nietzsche have torn open the soul of Western morality if he had Netflix? Would Dostoevsky have stared into the human abyss if he'd had Instagram reels? All of them faced boredom, and they didn't run. They leaned in, and through that leaning, they found something the modern world has forgotten. Boredom is the gateway to the unconscious, not just the mind's surface noise, but the dark forests beneath, the buried impulses, the hidden desires, the truths that live in silence. But how often do you go there? How often do you sit with yourself, with no agenda, no distraction, no plan? And more importantly, why does Tidal hat scare you? Maybe you think you'll discover nothing. Maybe you think there's nothing there worth finding. But here's the deeper fear. What if you find something that changes everything? Because once you confront the boredom, you begin to see the scaffolding of your life for what it is. The habits you didn't choose, the beliefs you inherited, the identity you stitched together from external praise and internal insecurity. And underneath all that, a stranger you barely recognize, a self untouched by noise. That is the real threat of boredom. It breaks the spell that keeps you numb, obedient, content. When boredom strips the external stimuli away, it exposes the architecture of your distraction. And in that exposure, in that stillness, something powerful begins to emerge. A question. A dangerous, wholly uncomfortable question. Who are you when the world stops watching? Because in that moment, when there's nothing left to do, nowhere to go, no one to impress, you meet the one person you've been avoiding all along, yourself. So maybe the real danger isn't boredom. Maybe it's the war we wage against it, the relentless pursuit of stimulation, the fear of stillness, the panic that rises when there's nothing left to scroll, swipe, or share. But if you dared to stop running, if you allowed the boredom to wash over you fully, what might you discover? What if, buried beneath the stillness, is not emptiness, but awakening? This is the question modern life never wants you to ask. This is the tension that our culture's endless noise is designed to drown out. This is the threshold, and very few are brave enough to cross it. But you're here now. The door is open, and beyond it lies something most people will never see. In the next section, we'll step through that door and explore why we fear boredom so much and what that fear reveals about the true architecture of the human psyche. But for now, just sit with this. Let the silence speak. And ask yourself, what have you been running from? The room is still quiet. You're still alone. But something has changed. After sitting with the discomfort of boredom, after feeling the twitch, the ache, the ghost hand reaching for a dead phone, something subtle has stirred. Not relief, not pleasure. Something stranger, something deeper, a tension that refuses to dissolve. And now comes the deeper question. Not what is boredom, but why is it so intolerable? Why does the mind rebel the moment stimulation fades? Why does silence feel like suffocation, like time itself has grown sharp teeth? To answer this, we must go far below the surface, beneath the self-help mantras, beneath the neurological studies, into the architecture of the human psyche. Boredom as the guardian of the unconscious. Carl Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Boredom, in this light, is not a trivial inconvenience. It is the psychic checkpoint where avoidance ends and confrontation begins. It is the guardian to the unconscious, standing between your curated persona and the dark wilderness of the self. When everything is stripped away, when silence stretches into something uncomfortable, your shadow begins to emerge. Not just the negative traits you suppress, but the forgotten parts of you, the ambitions you buried, the griefs you never processed, the dreams you let rot in the name of stability. And the tragedy. You weren't taught to face this, you were taught to flee. From childhood onward, modern life trains you to interpret stillness as laziness, solitude as abnormal, and boredom as a problem to fix. But Jung would argue the opposite. Boredom is not a failure of attention. It's a signal from the unconscious, a psychic alarm that something essential is being repressed. So what is being repressed? Your authentic self. And the more you ignore it, the louder the boredom grows. The existential vacuum. Let's bring in another voice. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and existential psychologist. In Man's Search for Meaning, he warns of a quiet, creeping danger he called the existential vacuum, the sense of emptiness that arises when life lacks meaning or direction. Frankl believed boredom is not simply a lack of things to do, it is the symptom of a life disconnected from purpose. And here's the paradox. We've built a world of infinite choice, but stripped it of existential content. You can watch 1,000 films, but rarely ask what you believe. You can speak to anyone across the world, but rarely listen to your own soul. You can chase dopamine all day long, likes, shares, clicks, goals, and still collapse at night, feeling hollow. Because stimulation is not the same as significance, and busyness is not the same as becoming. Frankl warned that when people cannot find meaning, they numb themselves with pleasure or distraction. Modern society has perfected this numbness. It even rewards it. But at what cost? Nietzsche's whisper, the abyss. Within, Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when the why is missing? When life becomes a series of tasks performed for no higher aim? When existence is no longer a journey, but a loop? Boredom, Nietzsche might say, is the psyche's revolt against meaningless repetition, against the herd mentality, against the soul's slow death by routine. But Nietzsche also issued a more disturbing warning. If you stare long enough into the abyss stares back into you. That abyss, it lives inside boredom, because when all the layers fall away, your work identity, your social media self, your productivity metrics, what remains? And are you brave enough to look? Because most people aren't. Most people construct lives carefully designed to avoid this confrontation. And that's not by accident, it's by design. The cultural war on stillness. Let's be brutally honest. Modern society is terrified of introspection. It glorifies motion, hustle, noise. It tells you that your worth is measured in output, your time in productivity, your attention in monetization. In a world addicted to stimulation, boredom becomes a threat to the system. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, saw it coming. He imagined a world where people would not be oppressed by force, but distracted into submission, where pleasure would be the weapon, where boredom would be exiled because it leads to thought, and thought leads to rebellion. We have arrived there. Not through violence, through convenience. Your apps are designed to keep you hooked. Your platforms are engineered to keep you scrolling. Your devices know you better than your friends do, and they know one truth above all. If you stop long enough to be bored, you might start asking questions, and questions are dangerous. Questions lead to awareness. Awareness leads to agency. Agency leads to change, and change threatens the machinery of control. So boredom is demonized. It's rebranded as inefficiency. It's pathologized as attention disorder. It's medicated, outsourced, optimized. Everything to keep you from realizing what boredom actually is. A doorway to freedom. Schopenhauer's paradox of human nature. Arthur Schopenhauer understood something haunting about the human condition, that our desires keep us in a cycle of pain. When we don't have what we want, we suffer. When we finally get it, we get bored. Desire and boredom, he saw them as the twin tyrants of existence. We swing between the two like a pendulum, never satisfied, never still, because to be still, to be truly content, would require a radical acceptance of self and world, and that is terrifying. So boredom becomes the space between cravings, the moment when neither pleasure nor pain dominates, and it reveals something unbearable. We are not at home in ourselves. We don't know what to do with our own minds when they are not being fed. We don't know how to sit in our own presence without stimulation, because stimulation gives us the illusion of purpose. Without it, we feel exposed, vulnerable, empty. And yet, Schopenhauer hints at something deeper. Boredom, unlike desire, forces us inward. It doesn't offer escape. It demands reflection. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a confrontation to be endured. And through that endurance, something remarkable can happen, but only if you stop resisting it. The secret you were never told. Let's put it plainly, you were never taught how to be alone with your own mind. No one showed you how to listen to the silence, how to mine boredom for insight, how to make peace with the stillness that reveals your unfiltered thoughts. Instead, you were taught to perform, to produce, to achieve. You were given tools to succeed in the external world, but nothing for the inner one. But the truth is this: boredom is not the absence of meaning, it is the absence of distraction. And when distraction dies, meaning has a chance to surface. Not manufactured meaning, not scripted slogans, real meaning, the kind that comes uninvited, the kind that doesn't care if it's convenient, the kind that can change your life if you let it, but it won't come when you're running. It won't come through a feed. It won't come when you're comfortable. It comes in the waiting, in the ache, in the moment you want to look away most. Because that's when the mirror appears. And in that mirror, if you dare to look, you'll see not just who you are, but who you were always meant to become. You probably don't remember the last time you were bored and truly allowed yourself to stay there. That's not a coincidence. It's not just your habits. It's not just the apps. It's something deeper, something more structural, something more strategic. You are not allowed to be bored, not because it's dangerous to you, but because it's dangerous to them. Modern life, despite its technologies, efficiencies, and comforts, has slowly constructed a world where your attention is the most valuable resource, and boredom Boredom is the one thing that threatens the entire system, because boredom leads to awareness, and awareness leads to questioning, and questioning leads to refusal. So the world feeds you something else. It feeds you constant stimulation, not to entertain you, but to sedate you. Let's follow this thread, because the consequences of boredom's absence are everywhere. You just have to know where to look. The tyranny of stimulation. When you never allow boredom to exist, something else takes its place. Hyperstimulation. Every scroll, every notification, every buzzing alert, every autoplay video. It's not harmless. It's not just entertainment. It's training. And what it's training is your nervous system. Neuroscience tells us that the brain rewires itself based on what it repeatedly experiences. This is neuroplasticity. And right now, yours is likely wired for rapid, shallow engagement. Your attention span is shrinking. Your tolerance for stillness is fading. Your ability to enter deep thought, the kind required for insight, creativity, and transformation, is quietly being dismantled. When you suppress boredom, you suppress the conditions necessary for depth. Instead, you get endless distraction, surface-level knowledge, compulsive novelty-seeking, a mind addicted to movement, incapable of rest. But what looks like engagement is often just mental noise. You're not thinking, you're reacting, you're not choosing, you're escaping. And in that escape, something dies. Your inner world begins to rot. The shallowing of the self. You might not feel it right away. After all, the world has made it easy. You're rewarded for being busy, not thoughtful. You're praised for being efficient, not introspective. You're told to follow routines, not question them. But slowly, invisibly, the consequences set in. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han writes of the transparent society, a world where everything is visible, performative, and flattened into productivity. Depth is replaced by exposure. Contemplation is replaced by content. Without boredom, the self becomes thinner, not in body, in soul. Because you were not designed to live without stillness, you were not built for endless engagement. Your psyche needs space, psychic white space, where it can wander, synthesize, dream. Without that space, you become a mirror reflecting others rather than a window into your own becoming. You begin to feel empty, but you don't know why. You try to work harder, scroll faster, optimize more, but the emptiness isn't from doing too little, it's from doing too much of the wrong thing. You're malnourished, not in food, in meaning. And boredom, had it been allowed to grow, would have shown you that. Addiction, the inverted mirror. Let's talk about addiction, not the Hollywood kind, not the drugs in dark alleys kind, the quiet kind, the kind that hides in plain sight, scrolling, gaming, porn, food, validation, shopping, even self-help. Dr. Gabor Maté suggests that addiction is not about the substance, it's about the pain underneath. It's about escaping a state of mind that feels unbearable. But what if that unbearable state is boredom? Not because boredom is inherently painful, but because, in boredom, all your other pain starts to surface, and without tools to face it, you run, again and again and again. This is how the cycle is built. You feel a moment of stillness. Stillness triggers boredom. Boredom triggers discomfort. Discomfort triggers escape. Escape leads to temporary relief. Relief fades. You're back at one. The end result? Dependence. Not just on substances, but on anything that numbs awareness. But boredom, if allowed, could have broken the cycle. Because it isn't your enemy, it's your invitation. And when you deny it, you deny your capacity to confront the pain behind your compulsions. The cultural addiction to noise, this isn't just personal, it's collective. We are living in a civilization that is addicted to noise, to stimulation, to speed, to the next thing. Our systems reflect it, our cities echo it, our politics dramatize it, our entertainment glorifies it. You are trained to be a consumer of information, not a creator of meaning. Even our education systems, once meant to cultivate thought, are now geared toward performance, metrics, output, standardized achievement. There is no space to pause, no space to ask, why am I learning this? No space to be bored, and from that boredom, to create. The result? Shallow thinking, burnout masked as ambition, anxiety disguised as productivity, and a populace too distracted to revolt. Aldous Huxley wasn't wrong. We didn't need censorship. We just needed a flood of noise so loud, truth drowned in the static. And all of it hinges on one thing: the removal of boredom. Because boredom is the start of reflection. Reflection is the start of awareness. Awareness is the start of resistance. The erosion of imagination. Think of your childhood, before the screens, before the schedules, when boredom still had a place in your life. What did you do? You imagined. Boredom wasn't empty, it was fertile. It led to creativity, to stories, to questions, to worlds built in your head. It wasn't a void, it was a playground. But now when boredom comes, we don't imagine, we consume. And consumption is passive. Imagination requires stillness. It requires you to sit with nothing long enough for something real to appear. But stillness has become intolerable. And so, imagination dies, not in a sudden crash, but in a slow erosion. A culture without boredom becomes a culture without vision. It can replicate, mimic, regurgitate, but it cannot dream. And without dreams, it cannot transform. Why this matters? Urgently. Here's the most unsettling part. You may never notice this happening. Most people don't. They don't feel their attention span eroding. They don't feel their inner world closing in. They don't feel the cage being built around their mind, because the bars are made of dopamine and the prison is lined with comfort. But slowly, over years, something fades. The ability to think deeply, the courage to sit in silence, the hunger for meaning, the patience for self-discovery. This is what boredom could have saved. Because boredom is not a threat to your identity, it is the seed of it. But if you don't reclaim it, you lose more than just silence. You lose the thread to your inner life. You lose the chance to become who you really are, not who the algorithms say you should be. And if an entire generation loses that thread, then we become a species capable of creating everything except meaning, capable of connecting to anyone except ourselves, capable of knowing everything and understanding nothing, the moment before the breakthrough. So now, here you are. You've seen what happens when boredom is avoided, suppressed, pathologized. You've seen how the absence of boredom reshapes attention, identity, culture, even consciousness itself. You're beginning to realize boredom was never the enemy. It was the buried clue, the signal flare, the secret knock on the door of the self. But now comes the turning point. Because if boredom is a forgotten doorway, what lies beyond it? What if you didn't run the next time boredom came? What if you didn't flinch or distract or scroll? What if you let it take you somewhere? That's what we'll explore next. The rebellion, the breakthrough, the return to yourself. You've seen the trap now. You've felt it. The invisible web of distractions. The way modern life has been engineered to keep you stimulated, productive, occupied, but never still, never alone, never bored. But something inside you knows the truth. This isn't how it's meant to be. And now, you're standing at the threshold of a quiet rebellion. Not with violence, not with slogans, not with rage, but with stillness, with space, with refusal. This is how you begin to break free. The radical act of doing nothing. In a world obsessed with motion, stillness is revolutionary. Think about that. The most radical thing you can do today might not be building a business or chasing a goal. It might be the simple act of doing absolutely nothing and not needing to justify it. Just sit. No phone, no music, no to-do list, no outcome. Just sit in silence. Let the discomfort come. Let the mind panic. Let the old scripts run wild. And then, wait. Because if you stay long enough, something begins to shift. The surface anxiety starts to burn off. The internal noise starts to soften. And beneath it all, a stillness begins to emerge. Not empty, but alive. This is not laziness. It's not stagnation. It's reclamation. You are reclaiming your time, your attention, your mind, and that is a direct threat to everything designed to control you. Create a void and protect it. You must create sacred boredom. Set aside time, daily, weekly, even in micro moments, to do nothing. This space must be protected like your life depends on it, because in many ways, it does. The mind, when allowed to drift without input, becomes creative. Ideas surface, emotions process, patterns connect. This is not a waste of time, this is integration. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this. He walked a lot, sometimes 8 hours a day. He believed walking in solitude was essential to his thinking. His ideas didn't come from frantic study, they came from emptiness, from rhythm, from slow internal combustion. You don't need to walk for 8 hours, but you do need to give yourself a void, not a break, not a vacation, a void, the fertile absence where your real self can emerge. Because your soul cannot speak through noise, it speaks through silence, and silence cannot reach you if you never stop filling it. Shift your relationship to boredom. You've been conditioned to interpret boredom as failure. It's time to reinterpret it as a threshold. Every time boredom appears, instead of fleeing, ask yourself, what part of me is trying to speak right now? What am I avoiding? What might emerge if I stay with this discomfort? Turn boredom into inquiry, into meditation, into ritual. Don't treat it as a signal to escape. Treat it as a signal to listen. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious wants to make itself known, that your psyche is always trying to move toward wholeness, but it cannot reach you if you're always running. Boredom is not blocking your growth, it's trying to initiate it. Ritual over routine. You don't need more routines, you need rituals. Routines are mechanical, rituals are sacred. Turn ordinary moments into sacred ones, not for productivity, but for presence. Take a walk with no destination. Sit in a room without lights or screens. Write without prompt. Stare out a window and do nothing. Let these be acts of devotion to the inner life. Rituals that say, I am more than a worker. I am more than a consumer. I am here. Because it's not about boredom anymore. It's about reclaiming your humanity. Unlearn stimulation addiction. This won't be easy. You've been conditioned to chase dopamine your whole life. The sudden stillness will feel like withdrawal, but you must detox your mind from hyperstimulation. Start small. No phone in bed, no multitasking during meals. One screen at a time. Build in gaps between tasks, not just for rest, but for nothing. As your nervous system begins to reset, you'll notice strange things. Your thoughts become more coherent, your emotions surface more clearly, you feel less fragmented, less frenzied. This is what happens when you allow boredom to reclaim its rightful place. You don't become less alive, you become more conscious. Read philosophy, not feeds. Your input shapes your inner world. If you're always feeding your mind fast, shallow content, your thinking becomes fast and shallow. You are what you consume. So consume deliberately. Read slow books, long essays, philosophy, depth over volume. Read Schopenhauer on suffering, Jung on integration, Huxley on distraction. These thinkers wrote in silence. Their ideas are not fast food. They require digestion. Boredom is the perfect entry point. It slows you down enough to receive them. And in reading them, you begin to remember. You were born with a mind built for depth. It's not gone, it's just been buried. Boredom is how you begin to dig it out. The art of creative boredom. The best artists, poets, and thinkers have always known this. Boredom is the spark before inspiration. Creative insight is not a product of constant thinking. It's a product of restraint, of space, of being willing to sit in the void and wait for the idea to arrive on its own. Think of Dostoevsky, writing in prison, stripped of comfort, forced into his own mind. Think of Kafka, who spent much of his life working an insurance job, writing in silence during the dead hours. Think of Virginia Woolf, who insisted on a room of one's own, not just for physical privacy, but for psychic space. If you want to create something real, art, meaning, transformation, you must embrace boredom not as an obstacle, but as an ally. Your rebellion is internal. Let's be honest, the world isn't going to slow down for you. There will always be another alert, another feed, another reason to numb yourself. The rebellion you're being called to isn't about fixing the world overnight. It's about changing your inner posture toward it. It's about becoming the kind of person who can sit with silence without fear, can hear their own thoughts without distraction, can meet boredom not with panic, but with curiosity. This is a shift in sovereignty. You are no longer at the mercy of your environment. You are no longer a passive consumer of stimulation. You are the gatekeeper of your own attention. That is a radical act. And when enough people reclaim that agency, the culture begins to change, not from the top down, from the inside out. You are remembering something ancient. This isn't new. Boredom has always been the portal. The monks knew it when they sat for hours in silence. The sages knew it when they fasted alone in deserts. The poets knew it when they wandered forests with empty notebooks. You are not creating a new practice, you are remembering an old one, the practice of being, of presence, of inner sovereignty, and now it's your turn. A final invitation. The next time boredom creeps in and you feel the instinct to run, don't. Let it sit next to you. Let it whisper. Let it show you what you've been too busy to see, because hidden in that stillness it's the thing you've been chasing all along. Not entertainment, not escape, not even relief, but yourself. There's a moment, rare, sacred, and deeply human, that comes only after you've done something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You've stopped running. You've faced the silence. You've sat with the ache, the twitch, the inner chaos. You've let boredom swell until it became unbearable, and then kept going. And now, you've passed through. Not out of boredom, but through it. And what lies beyond is not what you expected, not nothing, not stillness, but awakening. Because here is the ultimate truth. Boredom is not the absence of meaning, it is the space where meaning is born. The discomfort you feel in boredom is not emptiness, it is the birth pangs of selfhood, a deep and ancient call to return to what is real, what is unedited, what is not curated for approval. You, the real you, the one who lives beneath performance, beneath stimulation, beneath identity itself, that is who boredom is trying to introduce you to. The soul beneath the noise, the modern world has lied to you in the most seductive way possible. It told you that your value lies in what you do, what you produce, what you share. It filled your days with speed and spectacle. It offered you constant distraction dressed as connection, and all along it convinced you that stillness was useless and boredom was a glitch. But now, having passed through it, you know the truth. Stillness is not empty. It is full of what the world cannot give you. It is full of soul, of memory, of integration, of truth. When you no longer fear boredom, you begin to discover what has been waiting underneath all along, the buried desire you never named, the questions you've never let yourself ask, the grief that never had space to breathe, the voice that was always yours, but drowned in the noise. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of going inward, not into fantasy, not into spiritual escape, but into the raw territory of the self. And here's the most painful, beautiful part. You were never really bored, you were just disconnected from yourself, from life, from meaning. Boredom is the beginning of self-realization. Every great awakening begins in the dark. It starts with unease, then discomfort, then a refusal to tolerate what once seemed normal. This is the path of transformation, and boredom is the first door. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. But this doesn't begin with excitement or clarity. It begins with a rupture, a psychic friction, a sense that something is missing. That friction, that's boredom. Not as a flaw in your attention, but as a signal from your deeper mind. There is more to you than this. Look. And when you finally do, when you stop filling the silence and start listening to it, something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear yourself again. Not the version of you the world constructed, not the one addicted to feedback and validation, but the quiet, sovereign self that has been buried beneath the avalanche of doing. This is the you that was never meant to be optimized, only realized. The disintegration of illusion. Passing through boredom is not just a personal act, it is a philosophical reckoning. Because once you've faced it fully, you cannot unsee the illusions it exposes, that your value is tied to productivity, that constant stimulation is the sign of a full life, that silence is dangerous and noise is normal, that thinking deeply is a luxury and busyness is virtue. All of it, shattered, and in the ruins of those illusions, you find a terrifying freedom. Because now, you are responsible. You can no longer claim you're too distracted to think. You can no longer pretend. You don't know what's wrong. You can no longer escape into the numbness of boredom and blame the world. You are awake now. You are here, and you are fully responsible for what comes next. This is the terrifying beauty of real freedom. The spiritual dimension of boredom. There's one more layer. Boredom, if followed to its end, does not just lead to self-awareness. It leads to the threshold of something greater, something sacred. This is where the philosophers become mystics, where psychology fades into spirituality, where silence becomes not just absence, but presence. Because when the mind slows down, when thought becomes quiet, something begins to seep in, a sense of being that transcends doing, a connection not to a god or a dogma or a religion, but to consciousness itself. This is not fantasy, it is direct experience. Mystics across traditions have spoken of it. The Zen monks, sitting for hours in silence until the mind dissolves into awareness. The desert fathers, who fled to the wilderness to find God not in words, but in absence. The Sufis, who spun in circles until thought dropped away and only presence remained. And all of them began with the same first step. They got quiet, they got bored, they waited, and then something entered. Call it insight, call it grace, call it reality stripped bare. But it begins in the same place boredom does, nothing, and then reveals everything. The final realization. Here is the deepest truth. Boredom is not the enemy of life, it is the portal to it. It is the uncomfortable silence before the song of your soul. It is the empty room where your real self first whispers. It is the death of illusion and the birth of depth. You were not meant to be a consumer of endless input. You were meant to be a vessel of meaning, of presence, of vision. And if you allow boredom to do its work, not run, not numb, not panic, then it will break you open. It will peel away what is false, and it will show you the only truth that ever mattered. You were always enough. You just needed to sit still long enough to remember. A final image. Imagine yourself in a room, alone, no screens, no books, no voices, just you. 4 walls, silence. At first, the mind spins, then it whines, then it yawns, then it quiets. And in that stillness, the real begins. You feel the hum of your own breath. You hear your thoughts as distant thunder. You sense, somewhere in your chest, the flicker of aliveness that no app, no feed, no substance could ever replicate. And in that moment, you realize you were never bored. You were just afraid of meeting the truth of your own existence. Now you've met it, and it has changed you.